The rise and fall of communist leader Nicolae Ceausescu was charted and measured not in terms of progress but in failures. As a leader, he failed his people, his country, and himself. Ceausescu was born in 1918, third of 10 children, to a peasant family. His mother named Alexandrina and his father Andretu. From a young age, he hated the peasant life and began thinking of ways to get out. By age 11, he decided to run away from home because his father was an abusive alcoholic. He began work as a shoemaker's apprentice and working within a factory in Bucharest, living with his sister. His attitude towards peasant life influenced his political agenda. At age 11, he first joined the Romanian Workers' Party and was jailed in an internment camp for taking part in protests. Ceausescu's frequent stints in prison allowed him to create connections within the Communist Party. He was introduced to George Georgiou Dez, and the two of them began a close friendship. He was the leader of the Romanian Workers' Party. In 1939, he was out of prison at one point and met his wife, Elena. After meeting George Georgiou Dez, he began moving quickly up the ranks of the Communist Party, from Minister of Agriculture to the Deputy Minister of Armed Forces. He was then brought into the Central Committee. Later that year, he became a full member of the Politburo and rose to occupy the second highest position, just under Georgiou Dez. In 1965, Ceausescu was 36 years old. Sometime into the year, Georgiou died, and Nicolae Ceausescu succeeded him to become first secretary of the Romanian Workers' Party. It was not explicitly said that he would take over, but his close connection to George Georgiou Dez made everyone within the party realize that was truth.
In 1967, just 2 years after George Dez's death, Ceausescu declared himself president of the State Council of Romania, further expanding his power. At this point in his career, he was massively popular with the Romanian people because of his inspiring socialist ideas. His vision of an industrial revolution had up to this point come into fruition. Though Romania was by no means an economic superpower, the push toward industrialization seriously boosted the economy. Exports were increasing as the price of one of the country's chief imports was dropping. An oil deal with Iran helped push Romania toward prosperity. In a big political move, Ceausescu decided to distance himself from the Warsaw Pact and refuse the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. At this point, he was beginning to develop a cult of personality.
Pătrunderea trupelor celor 5 țări socialiste în Ceoslovacia constituie o mare greșeală și o primejdie gravă pentru pacea în Europa, pentru soarta socialismului în lume.
This decision aligned him with some of the Western world's greatest superpowers, from whom he borrowed money heavily. Their recognition further served to boost his ego as a ruler.
Pe arena internațională, ca lider al României, este excepțional.
In 1971, Ceausescu met leader Mao Zedong on a visit to China. He was highly impressed with the level of dedication and reverence shown to the communist leader. It was on this trip that Ceausescu realized the power of public persona. He subsequently organized rallies and marches in the Chinese style. He also began displaying self-aggrandizing propaganda throughout the message was clear. Ceausescu was taking steps toward becoming the supreme ruler of Romania. Like many communist leaders before him, Ceausescu had undeniably become a cult figure. With this power, Ceausescu enacted new policies and reforms, supposedly for the good of the Romanian nation.
In October of 1966, Ceausescu illegalized abortion, made divorce more difficult to get, prohibited the use of contraception, and raised taxes for parents with no children, attempting to increase the population. If a couple had 5 or more children, they were given special benefits, and if they were given 10 or more children, the mother was labeled a heroine. Problems began to arise from the overpopulation, as in orphan populations rose significantly, mass poverty, and homelessness. At this same time, Ceausescu began persecuting Hungarians because of territory disputes and the refusal to assimilate into Romanian culture. Also, the fact that they did not speak the Romanian language. To ensure that his image was on the forefront of the nation's mind, Ceausescu placed heavy restrictions on religion. Though he did not formally ban the practice, as a communist, he was highly suspicious of anything that was influential or powerful over a country. To show his distaste, he directly intimidated priests through threats, interrogations, and staged accidents. The state controlled the administration of each denomination and then interfered with finances, clerical appointments, and seminary admissions.
By the 1980s, the country was floundering in debt due to a gross misuse of funds by Ceausescu and his party. Romania was billions of dollars in debt to Western countries. In 1982, Ceausescu decided to reverse this by paying back all money within 10 years. To do this, he put a serious strain on the Romanian people, forcing them to work day and night. Not a single worker was being paid for their efforts, and everybody from school children to army officers were involved. Both agricultural and industrial exports were needed to pay off this sum in such a short amount of time. Therefore, Ceausescu destroyed villages to create big industrial apartment complexes for his workers. Food and electric rations were put into effect, and the people fell deeper into poverty. At the same time, Ceausescu had plans for a grand presidential palace. This would be the second largest in the world after the Pentagon in the United States of America. It has been reported that at one point, this construction project took up nearly 1/3 of the country's GDP. While Ceausescu was living a life of luxury, he was becoming increasingly blind to the needs of the people. Ceausescu was ruining the country. To prevent dissension and maintain control, he employed the use of a secret police force called the Securitate. They used terror tactics to suppress the Romanian citizens.
As Ceausescu's power increased, so did his wife Elena's, eventually occupying the second highest spot within his organization.
Nu aș putea să nu amintesc în aceste momente faptul că am avut marea fericire ca încă din perioada ilegalității să lucrez nemijlocit alături de tovarășul meu de viață, care a constituit pentru mine un înalt exemplu de dârzenie și dăruire totală în lupta revoluționară, de nestrămutată încredere în victoria cauzei drepte a clasei muncitoare a partidului nostru.
While Ceausescu may have been preparing for a family-run dictatorship, there were echoes of rebellion in the country.
Ca să fie ales membru Comitetului Central și din cadrul membrilor Comitetului Central să fie reales. De ce? Pentru că Ceausescu se sustrage controlului partidului. Caută să... Cum nu e corect? Tovarășe!
Though Ceausescu still had the support of his Senate, the people were becoming increasingly hostile with his totalitarian tactics. On December 16, 1989, riots began to break out in Timișoara, and the Secretariat began firing on citizens. Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu were not particularly concerned with these riots and decided to take their planned trip to Iran the same day. The riots began when a priest spoke of anti-government sentiment within one of his sermons. Nicolae Ceausescu remained blind to his opposition.
Tovarăși și prieteni, cetățeni ai Republicii Socialiste România, mă adresez în această seară întregului popor al patriei noastre socialiste în legătură cu evenimentele grave care au avut loc în ultimele zile la Timișoara. În zilele de 16 și 17 decembrie, câteva grupuri de elemente huliganice au organizat o serie de manifestări și incidente, trecând la atacarea unor instituții de stat, distrugând și jefuind o serie de clădiri, de magazine, de clădiri publice, iar în ziua de 17 decembrie și-au intensificat activitatea împotriva instituțiilor de stat și de partid, inclusiv a unor unități militare.
Ceausescu and his wife were caught only a few days after attempting to flee Budapest in a helicopter. They were brought back to the city and brought into a schoolroom for a show trial. When confronted with charges of terrors against humanity, they believed nothing that they had done was wrong. The couple did not understand that the execution was to take place directly after the show trial. Upon realizing this, the final request of the couple was that they be killed together. Ceausescu left the country with a crippling debt, disintegrated political system, and restrictive social policies. Elena and Nikolai's deaths represented total liberation for the people of Romania.